The following program presents principles designed to promote good health and is not intended to take the place of personalized professional care. The opinions and ideas expressed are those of the speaker. Viewers are encouraged to draw their own conclusions about the information presented.
Hello and welcome to Health for a Lifetime. I'm your host, Don McIntosh, and today we're going to be talking about water. And here to talk with us is Dr. Alan Handysides. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Now, water is a big thing. I think probably makes up, what, 70–80% of the body?
Oh, yes. It's a big thing. It makes up about that much of the planet's surface, too. You know, when you look at the world from space, it's the blue planet.
Mm-hmm. Many people take it for granted that they have good water, but is that really true?
Well, here in North America, probably most of us do have good water. But if we were to look at the world's people globally, if we were to look at it, it's not true. About only 3% of the world's water is fresh water. Mm-hmm. And probably less than half of that is clean fresh water that we can drink. And that means unpolluted. And not all of that is available.
Now, you were mentioning that the World Health Organization, so-called WHO,
yeah, WHO.
Had a big meeting about water recently, and what was that all about?
Well, they had, I believe it was the 22nd of March 2001 was designated World Water Day. Mm-hmm. It was to draw attention to the fact that there are 6 billion people in the world, and that 40% of them do not have access to safe water.
40%?
40% of 6 billion.
Wow. So this is almost a crisis.
It's an ongoing crisis. It's been a crisis for so long, you know, that sometimes we forget about it.
And because, you know, here in America or where we're filming this, we just are not as aware of those types of things, but this is more of a worldwide problem that we really need to address.
Yeah. You know, when I first went to Africa as a missionary, mm-hmm. It was only then that I realized the importance of water. I'd just taken water for granted, and I'm sure most of us in North America we think it just comes out of the taps. We don't really know how it got into the taps. We're not aware of how it's been purified or prepared for us. We just take it for granted. But then when I went to Africa, I suddenly realized, even if you're looking at a piece of land, you know, somebody once you said, can you put a clinic here, or could we build something on it? The first and most important question is, what's the water supply? Mm. It's not coming down a pipe. So where are you going to get your water?
Is it just that there is less water available, less fresh water available? Has the source of fresh water changed, or what's the problem?
No, I don't think that the source of fresh water has changed. A lot of fresh water is locked up in the polar ice caps. That's where there's a lot of fresh water locked up in the polar ice caps. But there's probably not been a dramatic change in the last few centuries, anyhow, in the availability of water. But there's been a lot of contamination and pollution of the water. So we have, in countries of developing nations or developed nations, we've had problems with pollution with mercury and lead and toxic products, the dioxins and so forth. And then in developing countries, the problem is that it's often contaminated by human and animal waste, so that it's biologically contaminated.
So sanitation is a big issue.
Way big. It's a massive, massive problem. I'll give you an example. Schistosomiasis, right? That's a big name. In South Africa, the South Africans and Southern Africans call it bilharzia. And that's not named after William Harzier, it's just the name that they give. That's caused by human excreta containing the eggs of the schistosoma getting into the water, infecting snails, which live maybe in the reeds, on the reeds and so forth, infects the snails, goes through a cycle in the snail, and then they release into the water the second phase of these organisms, which can pierce the skin. So bathers, swimmers, children playing in the water, the microorganism gets through the skin, crawls in the lymphatics, goes up and finds itself into the blood vessels of either the bladder or the large bowel. It will mature into a worm that's going to live in the blood vessels. And a male will find the female. They'll envelop with each other like this, and they will remain mated and will lay eggs in the wall of the blood vessel, which will migrate through into the bowel and into the bladder. Now, there are 600 million people in the surface of the Earth's globe that are infected with schistosomiasis.
Ooh.
You know, these are diseases we haven't even heard of. I mean, I know when I say the word you think of schistosomiasis, but think of the numbers of people. And, you know, sometimes we make these matters worse ourselves by how we handle water. For instance, when they put in dams, you put in the Aswan Dam, schistosomiasis just came like a plague after that. I'm looking at them building at the on the Yangtze. This is going to be the largest dam in the world to dam back and control the floodwaters of the Yangtze. And you say, I wonder what the effect is going to be.
Now, why is that?
Disease.
So they Aswan Dam, they stop up the water there near, is that near Egypt?
That's yes.
Right. And that water is backed up, and what happens? Is it
Then
a breeding ground
the people,
for that?
yes, are using the water. The perimeter has increased so much more because now it's not just a river that's running through, it's a vast perimeter of a huge lake. All the people's using it, bathing in it, you know, doing other things in it that they shouldn't be doing, and the runoff from the land, poor sanitation. So we get this situation of human contamination in polluted waters, bacteriologically.
So we don't have schistosomiasis, is that schistosomiasis here in the United States as much.
No.
But what do you do when you treat that? You've got these worms and eggs and everything in your body. What happens?
Well, of course, there are anti-helminthic, anti-worm medicines that can be given, not without some toxic effects. They will be given, and hopefully you'll kill off these worms and stop the process of the laying of the eggs. But the fibrosis, the scarring, that is still there. And schistosomiasis is a potent cause of bladder cancer because it interferes with the lining of the bladder, and you get these cancers. I remember one time with limited diagnostic abilities, I felt this lump in a woman's abdomen, and on examination I felt, well, she's got fibroids, but she was complaining of pain. And so we opened her up, and it wasn't a lump in the bladder, it was a huge, in the uterus, it was a huge bladder carcinoma. And when we sent away the tissue, of course it was infested with schistosomiasis, plus the cancer which came on the top of it. So that's a fairly typical story for people who have schistosomiasis.
Well, this is just not something you should let alone. If you have that, or if you're in one of those areas of the world, you need to be
bathe in those polluted rivers. I mean, for the message I would have for Americans going over there is be careful. I remember we had an Australian missionary who was working. It was a fantastic missionary. But, you know, sometimes they're a little bit cowboy. You have to be a bit of a cowboy to be able to tolerate that stuff, you know. So he was telling me that he was going water skiing and taking the kids water skiing. I said, don't do it in the water. He said, no, we're not going to get it. 2 years later, we had to send him home. He was riddled with schistosomiasis. Very, very sad.
What other types of things do you see besides schistosomiasis in the water?
Well, the other things that you can get, of course, water can become polluted with human excrement. So contaminated water is a source for typhoid fever, cholera. A common pathogen is Giardia lamblia. Now, Giardia lamblia is not a foot soldier who marched with Garibaldi in his, you know, early. It's a microorganism that's a protozoa. It's got a little flagellate tail there. You can
I've heard of that in America.
Yeah, we call it beaver fever in Canada. It's where dirty water or contaminated water, if you drink that, then they get a lot of diarrhea, explosive, gassy feeling, may become chronic. Amoebiasis, amoeba histolytica, which can cause abscesses, that also can come through contaminated water. Coliform infections, the diarrheal diseases, most of the diarrheal diseases are waterborne infections.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, that's a pretty practical thing I'm sure everybody's experienced, diarrhea. So one of the things you have to look at if someone gets diarrhea is their water source. What else do we need to know about that?
Well, we know, I'll tell you how it is. We can reduce the instance of diarrhea in a given community by 27% by just ensuring a clean water supply. So at our little mission hospital where we were in Lesotho, we had a 50-bed ward, they still do, a children's ward. About 75% of the children that were in there because of diarrhea. And that they would stay on an average 8 days. So you can imagine that we were turning over probably something like 1,500, 2,000 children a year coming into the hospital and spending 8 days there because of diarrhea.
And it's 27% of that could be reduced if you looked at the water source.
If you just cleaned the water source. And you must remember, because it affects children who are often borderline as far as their nutrition is concerned, who may be in a state of suboptimal health, that often it's catastrophic and it's the straw that breaks the camel's back.
It just weakens them and they get dehydrated.
They become dehydrated, they lose energy, they become apathetic. Very, very, very sad.
So it's not just enough to get the diarrhea stopped. Let's say a mother is watching now and their child has diarrhea right now, or someone does. What should you do? What should you watch for with that?
Well, of course, the first thing that you have to be aware of when you see a child with diarrhea is you have to say, is this child losing more liquids and more fluids than we can keep up with by what we're giving him by mouth? Of course, you have to know that what you're giving him by mouth is clean. I mean, there's no point continuing to feed him by mouth that which started the diarrhea in the first place. So you have to have clean, preferably in those sort of situations, boiled water, and then you have to see that the child is getting enough of that, plus a little electrolyte, which usually means a little bit of salt, a little bit of glucose added to that, so that the child is rehydrated in a balanced way, not just with water, otherwise you'll get salt imbalance. And if you can keep up with the diarrhea, then the child will probably cope. But if it starts to be a bloody flux with mucus in the stool, passing large amounts of it, a child is going to dehydrate very rapidly. And as some of these very small babies, you're going to see their fontanelles, little soft spot at the top of their heads, are going to sink in, and they're going to start to have lost the turgor of their skin. You've lifted up, it doesn't have good elasticity. They're going to start to be lethargic. Their eyes start to sink.
You need to get them in right away.
They need to be in there, chop, really quickly. Yeah.
So some practical things before we go to our break. What kind of things should we do if we don't know what the water supply is like? We don't know whether or not it's clean or not. You mentioned boil the water. Anything else we can do?
Yeah, boiling the water is fine. Of course, you must remember the effect of altitude on boiling temperature. If you're very high altitude, boiling the water will require it to be boiled a little longer than if you're boiling it at sea level. So boiling the water sufficiently long.
Sea level, what, 1 minute?
Sea level, a couple of minutes will be fine. A little higher, maybe 10,000 feet, you maybe want to do it for 5 or 6 minutes just to be sure. So you want to boil your water to be sure that that's fine. The other thing is you can filter the water, especially if you're North American that is traveling into these countries. I would advise that you take with you and pay a little extra for it. Get one of these filters that will filter out bacteria. And then you know you can take even bacterially contaminated water and you can filter it clean. And it will take out a lot of the other toxins too.
Does the filter take out viruses?
There are some filters that will take out viruses, yes, that are good enough for that.
So you need to get those if you're going to be traveling.
And then if you're not able to do that, you can buy chlorine tablets. Now chlorine, is one doesn't like to push. It's not so tasty. Of itself, it's not good for you. So you have to put it in, then you have to let the water stand for a long time. If you had absolutely none of these things, of course you might just put the water in a bottle and let the sun shine on the bottle.
I see.
And leave it there for a good few hours, and the sunlight will actually sterilize the water in the bottle.
If the water is cloudy, should you drink it?
Well, I think it depends.
It's a pretty obvious question.
If you're desperate and you haven't got any water at all, I mean, you maybe want to filter it through your shirt or something. But I mean, you could be in a desperate situation. There just is not clean water available. The thing for us to do is to educate people about clean water sources, how to protect their springs and so forth.
Is rainwater clean?
Rainwater is by and large clean, except it depends on how you collect it. For instance, if you're collecting it off an asbestos roof, you worry about asbestos particles. If your birds have been dropping all over the roof, you've got a burn drop roof. But if you could collect it in a relatively clean way, then rainwater tends to be not bad.
We're talking with Dr. Alan Handysides. We've been talking about water. It's an important issue. It's a global concern, and it's practical for you. We hope that you can join us when we come back.
Have you found yourself wishing that you could shed a few pounds? Have you been on a diet for most of your life, but not found anything that will really keep the weight off? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, then we have a solution for you that works. Dr. Hans Diehl and Dr. Eileen Ludington have written a marvelous booklet called Reversing Obesity Naturally, and we'd like to send it to you free of charge. Here's a medically sound approach successfully used by thousands who are able to eat more and lose weight permanently without feeling guilty or hungry through lifestyle medicine. Dr. Diehl and Dr. Ludington have been featured on 3ABN, and in this booklet, they present a sensible approach to eating, nutrition, and lifestyle changes that can help you prevent heart disease, diabetes, and even cancer. Call or write today for your free copy of Reversing Obesity Naturally, and you could be on your way to a healthier, happier you. It's absolutely free of charge, so call or write today.
Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Alan Handysides from the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. You're the head doctor, and one of the things doctors are concerned with is water.
Right, sure am.
So we've talked a lot about it, but are there any other diseases you'd like to mention? We've mentioned a whole host of them and what to do about if we have those, but anything we've missed?
Well, you know, I think perhaps of importance to our folks in the States who may be traveling to other parts is hepatitis A.
Hepatitis A. There's so many hepatitis. Explain the difference.
Well,
There's A, B, C, D, E.
A, B, C, yeah, there's a lot of hepatitis viruses. Hepatitis A is one that's water transmitted. Hepatitis B and C are probably blood and
I see.
human fluid transmitted.
All right.
But the hepatitis A is what we call a fecal-oral transmission from feces to the mouth, and so therefore when water gets contaminated, you've got the picture.
Okay.
Okay, now a lot of travelers need to worry about this, especially if you're going to an undeveloped country like, I won't name them, but if you know there's a developing country that you're going to, you maybe should think about hepatitis A. Now, up until recently, when I say recently, the last couple of years or so, they used to give you gamma globulin. Of course, people were very frightened about taking gamma globulin because that's from somebody else. And you're worried about AIDS and transmission of the other hepatitis diseases and those sort of things were worried.
Because you're getting that out of their blood.
Out of their blood.
Right.
But now there's a vaccine available.
I see.
Which is not living, it's not a live virus, and it's able to give you immunity to hepatitis A. So anybody that's traveling would be wise to be immunized against hepatitis A. Hepatitis A usually doesn't cause a problem, but every now and again, maybe 1 in 4,000, 1 in 5,000, it causes a fulminating liver problems, and I've seen children die
from hepatitis
A.
So let's say you didn't have that vaccine and you went anyway. How would you avoid? You wouldn't. You would make sure all the water you used was boiled. You would have canned type water or pop, or maybe that's not the
maybe
best
bottled
thing.
water.
Bottled water.
Now, in developing countries, you have to be careful about the bottles because a lot of people will just go around and collect bottles, fill them up with water, put the caps back on, and sell it to you as bottled water. So you need to know it's sealed. You know. And another good thing to do is to crush the bottle when you're finished with it, so that they're not tempted. That's a very important thing for travelers to do.
What about fruit or produce or vegetables in those types of situations?
Of course, they can be contaminated. We've had outbreaks, large outbreaks of diseases from countries that have been either sprayed with contaminated water or the hands of the people handling the fruits and the vegetables have contained contamination. So you have to be careful.
What if you have the fruit itself and you peel it yourself? Is that safer?
Yes, but again, let's say you take the fruit and you peel it like this, then you move it around, you peel it, and your hands were already contaminated. It's very difficult to peel. Maybe you wash it. That will get rid of, you know, a certain degree of contamination. Maybe If you're really living in a country like that where you're worried about it, you maybe soak it in a little chlorine, which is the easiest way to get chlorine is bleach. And if you put a tablespoonful of bleach in a quart of water, and then we used to take our lettuce leaves and things like that, we would soak them in that, and then we would rinse it off with boiled water. There's no point rinsing it off with dirty water,
Right.
but you rinse it off with water. Or you might put it in one of those, I like those centrifuge jobs that my wife has, and spin those lettuce leaves around and get rid of a lot of the water, and then leave it to dry, and then you may eat it like that.
Yeah, that saves a lot of pain and lots of
a lot
things.
of misery. Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of yellow,
Right.
skin.
Now, you sit in a chair where you see a lot of things around the world, and you're part of a global network, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that's very, 205 nations out of the 223 nations of the world.
Right, that's right.
And so what is the Seventh-day Adventist Church doing to address the concerns of water around the world? I think we have some pictures that ADRA gave to us, the Adventist Development Relief Agency. But what are you doing?
Well, if you look at the pictures here, there's a woman carrying a bucket of water. This is the lot of millions of African women. They walk literally miles a day to bring a pail of water home. So when you look at that, you say, what is the economic impact of that? If she spends 3 hours a day carrying water, that's 3 hours that she's not tending the crops, 3 hours that she... The economic impact is something that we have to look at that. We look at the health impact of that. You don't know where she got that water from.
Or what goes into it when she's walking along?
No, you don't know what goes in. And she's had to carry it. When she comes home, it's precious. So as far as washing and cleansing themselves, it's at a premium. You're not. You and I sit in the shower. How long did you spend in the shower this morning? Probably, 15 minutes.
What's it look
wow.
like?
But every bucket full of water comes like that. That has tremendous impact. So you say, wow, this is important. It's something that we can do to help them.
So do we get involved in wells or different things? I think we have a picture of one of those. But
ADRA has been one of the world's outstanding agencies. I mean, if you look at there's a well. ADRA must have drilled thousands of wells throughout the world. You'll notice it's a hand pump. People say, why don't we have a diesel pump on there? That would be much better. Because the diesel pump, they don't have the money to pay for the diesel fuel. They put the diesel in the wrong place, and the pump doesn't work anymore.
And I noticed it's capped, too.
Very important. You see, these are agrarian communities, cattle, goats, chickens,
so the dung
everything.
And the feces and all that.
That is kept out of there. Even the human dung and feces is kept out of there. So the cap is very, very important.
And ADRA has done this in all kinds of countries. You've seen these wells all over the world?
I've seen these wells all over. They've been doing this for years. I remember being involved in a project at our own hospital years ago now. I'm talking about years ago, and it's been increasing ever since then, where we protected 70 springs in 1 year.
And this was in a rural community?
Just in a rural community. You go and say, where are you getting your water from? Here it's running out of the corner of a rock, or it's a little muddy pool that's got a spring-fed pool. And you would protect it, that is, somehow cover it, be sure that you didn't back the water up to block the spring, make it come out somewhere else. And by protecting it in that way, putting a running water where they could collect the fresh spring water out of a pipe, you cut their problems 27% with diarrhea. And you
saving hundreds, millions of lives.
Millions of lives throughout. When you multiply this throughout the world, in a given community, you might be saving dozens of lives a year.
Now, I imagine a lot of what you do in these poor countries, if I call them that, well, the developing countries, is a lot of education. But what other connections do you see between the poor and water supply?
Well, poor people can't afford the processing of water. Our water systems are, very elaborate. We take water, we filter it, we precipitate it, we treat it with chemicals, we pipe it. Once it's been used, we dispose of it. This is an amazing infrastructure. It is the infrastructure, the public health infrastructure, that resulted in a 60% improvement in the health of the Western nations. Now, but that takes money. When you don't have any money, what do? I remember in the little village outside of our hospital, I said to them, if there's one thing we could do for you, what would it be? They said, put a tap in the village. Mm-hmm. So we were able to do that. It was 3/4 of a kilometer up the hillside. We put the pipe up, brought it down. They had that tap in the village. That was to them like liquid gold. But they didn't have the money. That's right. The fountain of life.
Well, you know, when you think about, just a quick question, bottled water versus not bottled water in the United States, any value to that?
It depends on the bottled water, and it depends on the tap water. By and large, probably we're fine with the tap water. And the reason I say that is that in a global perspective, we're the luckiest people in the world. See, when you look at the problems I've been talking about today, to talk about minute problems.
Like bottled water versus tap.
It seems like we're...
Trite almost.
Yes. On the other hand, if we are concerned about our water, certain bottled water may be better. But you must remember, some bottled water is just, you know, from the city supply of some...
Yeah, and they want to just make a
That's
little
right,
extra
they're
money.
just making money. It's the biggest come-on in making of money for some of these companies. On the other hand, some of the water is pure, some of it's very, very nice. So it depends.
We've got 2 minutes left, and I want you to share from a Christian physician perspective, what's your favorite Bible study as it relates to water or Bible story? And you know, comment on that as we close our program today on water.
I'd like to tell you about something that I've seen myself. Now, I'm a physician. I'm a skeptic by training, and I have seen many, many sick people get better, and I believe that oftentimes it's good medicine. The good Lord, of course, is giving his strength and power. But I remember a little child, 41 days this child had been in the ward. IVs, every available vein. I was doing cut downs to find the vein, to keep this going, because the kid had diarrhea, pooping out, diarrhea. We didn't have a laboratory backup to find out what it was. The mother was beside herself. So she said to me, "Doctor, I'm taking this child home." I said, "You're going to take the child home? It'll die at home." She said, "Well, it's going to die here anyway. I'd rather it die at home." I said, "Please give us one more day." I called all the nurses and we prayed. Do you know, from the time we prayed, that child never had another diarrheal stool.
Amen.
And I'm reminded of when Jesus stood at that well. He said to her, "I will give you water that will be a spring of fountain within inside you. You'll never thirst again." That's what he did for that little child.
That's going to be the day when there's going to be no more water problems.
No more water problems.
We're glad that you've been watching us today. We've talked about water. It's a global concern, but more than that, as the doctor has reminded us, it's a spiritual concern. We hope that you do come in touch with the water of life.
Amen.